I won't prattle on other than to say we're joined by Alex Smith, who is the head of post excavation at Headlands Archaeology and was responsible for the archaeology work on the construction of the A14. We're delighted to see you. Thank you for coming.
No problem. Partly responsible. There's a big team.
Well, I guess it's a big team, yes.
Yeah.
I was picking you up. I'm sorry.
Excellent, excellent. That's fine. That's fine. No,
so yeah. If I put you onto Spotlight, screen share is on. So you're
okay. So I'll share my screen and get that. Yes.
Looking good.
Yes. Can everyone see the main big screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. What I'd like to do really over the next 30 minutes is to present to you some of the highlights of what was really one of the largest ever excavations ever undertaken in the UK as part of the A14 improvement scheme in Cambridgeshire, undertaken by Highways England. I'm sure this is a scheme many of you obviously from Cambridge are very familiar with. So what I'll do initially is just say a little bit about why we were here and what we were doing, and then put together present a highlights package of some of the main results of the scheme as we've been going forward. So why were we here? Well, again, I'm sure you know this road and the disruption caused by this road quite well. The A14 was improved between Cambridge and Huntingdon. It was widened in places and there were new stretches of road in others. So it created 12 miles of new roads, 10 miles of widening to existing roads, and dozens of new structures, that mainly bridges and culverts. And the construction of the road, especially on something of this scale, had a huge impact upon the archaeology through excavation of quarries, through the creation of what's known as flood compensation areas, but basically ponds, and the constructions of compounds, and of course the actual construction of the road itself. So archaeologists needed to come and investigate the archaeology here before the construction took place. So in terms of what we were doing, initially there was what's termed a scheme of archaeological evaluation to gain really an understanding of where there were archaeological remains. This took a number of different forms. We did desk-based research, we did geophysical surveys, we analysed aerial photographs, and crucially, we undertook a huge scheme of what's called trial trenching to try and understand what archaeology was there. And this essentially identified 228 hectares of land where it was noticed that archaeological remains survived from a whole range of periods, right the way from Neolithic to post-medieval. Yes. Yeah, sorry. This is an area equivalent to, I think it's been worked out as half of Gibraltar, the area that we excavated, or what my colleagues like to term, we have the equivalent of 5 Vatican cities that we excavated. So essentially, this is one of the largest archaeological projects ever undertaken. Okay. And it's these areas that were then subject to full excavation, and that's what I'm going to talk about today.
Give me the telephone line is not good, but every other word is.
Sorry, can you mute yourselves, please, people?
Oh. We okay?
I want to visit you tomorrow morning.
Oh, God.
I just want Sarah might be able to manage without a visit from us tomorrow.
Yes, I'm sure that's right. Forgive me, I'm a bit adrift.
I'll go down and mute everybody.
For your care visit.
Keith, can't you mute everybody?
I'm doing it. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. The
carry on.
The joys of Zoom meetings. These things.
They're wonderful, aren't they?
Yeah.
Fire away.
Okay, great. Right. Okay, so just a little bit about the team. As I said, it's certainly not just me. There was we had MOLA-Headland Infrastructure. You can see down there, but made up of 2 organisations. my organisation, Headland Archaeology and Museum of London Archaeology, joined forces for this project to call ourselves MOLA-Headland Infrastructure. And there were also many other companies that helped us. Altogether, we had 250 archaeologists working here, something people from all over the world, particularly lots of people from colleagues over in Europe, which is a little bit more difficult to do now, but it was a real joint effort. And in total, they've worked out that there were 64,845 days or 177 years spent on the excavation of the scheme. So that just gives you some sense of a scale of how big this project was. So what did our team do exactly? So first of all, just to say that the majority of our staff were out in the fields in all weather. The first stage that we have to do is machining on the sites. This is really to expose the archaeology. We directed the machining to make sure that the machines stripped very carefully down to the correct level, i.e. the level where the archaeology is, which is what you're seeing there. And after they've done that, when the sites have been stripped, we identified the archaeological remains and surveyed them using digital equipment. This was then processed by a computer to create what's called a pre-excavation plan. And we continuously updated this plan and also surveyed the features once they've been excavated. And then the actual excavation of features themselves, we hand excavated most of them. We used hand tools such as mattocks, shovels and trowels. We're essentially excavating the fills of features. So these would be pits, ditches, post holes, kilns, ovens and burials and the like. Looking for finds that can help us to date the features and interpret them, and environmental evidence, and essentially features about information about what these features were. Much of this is heavy manual work, particularly when you have to dig out huge big ditches that surrounded some of these sort of these ancient settlements. But there also is more delicate work, as you can see here from this rather wonderful sort of shot of someone very delicately excavating a Bronze Age pit burial. You can see at that point. Then once the features have been hand excavated, we obviously need to record them. We're doing this through photographs of features, hand-drawn plans and sections, and paper sheets called context sheets, which record information about the feature's size, its depth, its shape, etc. And we produced 100,000 of these context sheets. So there's a lot of hard work that's gone into creating this record, which we took away from the site. And essentially, this has enabled us to tell the story of what is happening here in the past. And finally, on this sort of what we did sort of section, just processing of the finds and the environmental samples was vitally important. And then we entered all of this information onto a large computer database. All of this is then used in the post-excavation phase of work, where we are now analysing all of this material to get information about what it was, how it was made, what date it is, and what it tells us about the people that are living in the past. And then we were producing reports on our excavations, which we're in the middle of doing at the moment. So now I've told you a little bit about what we were doing. I know you're probably more interested in exactly what we found. So I'm going to run through a highlights package of some of the amazing bits of archaeology that we found within the course of this long-running excavation. So the earliest evidence goes way back in time. This is from the real deep gravels in an area near the river Great Ouse, in the form of mammoths. You can see a mammoth tusk there. We've also found evidence for woolly rhino, bison and reindeer. This is all from when this whole area was a cold, cool climate and a large sort of open floodplain. The overall dating, the scientific dating that we did of these deposits, is called Middle Late Divensian, which is about 60,000 to 11,000 years ago that these mammoths were roaming the Cambridgeshire landscape. We've also found a few human Paleolithic artifacts, 2 large worked flint flakes, and a hand axe, which may have been Neanderthal, which really is the first hint of human occupation in the landscape. Oh, excuse me, my dog behind me wants to get out. Going forward into the Neolithic and Bronze Age, the evidence for the earliest major bits of human activity, we found dates to this sort of Neolithic Bronze Age period. That's about 4000 to 800 BC, so about 6,000 years ago. I think that's been worked out as your great-grandparents times 200. So if you want to work out in generational terms. This map shows the location of these features. It's a bit faint, I'm afraid, but these little orange ones are Neolithic and the sort of the grey ones are Bronze Age. Now, it's quite difficult to find evidence for people living that long time ago. We tend to find less evidence for their settlement and more evidence for other activities, particularly ceremonial and burial monuments. The larger, more spectacular features which survived and are often quite revered in later periods. Now, this is certainly the case for the A14, where we found 3 large Neolithic henge monuments. That's a sort of ceremonial monument, which I'll come back to in a bit. 6 Bronze Age barrows, these are burial monuments, and a further 2 big Bronze Age burial sites as well. So it's these sort of ceremonial aspect that we get a great deal more information with at this time. So in terms of the henges, as I said, we found 3 Neolithic henges. They're all really at the western end of the scheme, around the sort of Brampton, Ulkenbury area. They're large circular monuments formed of a large ditch surrounded by a bank. They're supposed to have at least one entrance, although one of ours didn't. So technically, it's probably not to be interpreted as a henge. They're typically what you might see sort of empty inside. You can see one here, a really big ditch, but there's nothing going on inside of it. So we don't really know exactly what their functions are, although there are lots of different interpretations. Some of these include crowning ceremonies. Here's a mock crowning ceremony when one of our supervisors was elevated to a new position as a project officer on site. Other times it might be that they're settings for folk tales and stories of old, or maybe of their ancestors. Again, we've recreated this by a Friday afternoon debriefing on site and storytelling session to try and, you know, get an idea of what these sort of monuments may have been used for in a sort of slightly light-hearted sort of way. In terms of barrows, we found a number of Bronze Age barrows. The photograph here is one of the largest. It's an absolute whopper. You can see there from the scale of the people working on it. It's an absolutely huge monument located just on the terrace of the River Great Ouse floodplain. Barrows are circular monuments comprising outer ditch and mound used for burials, often have a central burial and other cremations or burials associated with them. So in this example, for example, we found 30 cremation burials which were placed in pots. They were in urns, concentrated in the area. It's possibly a later set of cremations inserted into the earlier barrow. But it's quite a spectacular one of a number of spectacular Bronze Age finds from the area. So moving rapidly forward into the Iron Age, unlike the Bronze Age, the evidence for Iron Age activity mostly comprises settlements, actually places where people were living, particularly farmsteads where, again, people were living and farming the land around them. And on this scheme, we found 14 sites with evidence for Iron Age activity, all of them a bit different, representing different groups of people who lived there. These are all these sort of dots around here. These are all representing Iron Age activity or Iron Age settlements. Now, many of these were continuously occupied through from the Iron Age and into the Roman period, which is really interesting because it then allows us to see what impact the Roman conquest had on the people that were living in this part of the landscape. So this is just an example of one of these Iron Age farms. It's from the western end of the scheme. Here you can see these sort of Iron Age big ditched enclosures on the plan. And then there are a number of what are called roundhouses, these circular areas here. Here's an example, a nice snowy example of a reconstruction of what one of these roundhouses may have looked like. And they've also got a number of post-hold structures, which are probably granaries for storing of grain. Now, we found some really interesting Iron Age finds on our excavations. Possibly none more sort of interesting or sort of macabre or gruesome than this one. This is a bone comb, but it's made from a piece of human skull, which the human skull was fairly fresh when it was converted into a comb. It's fairly gruesome, but we don't know the story behind it, of course. Was it an honoured family member, and this was sort of a way to sort of keep them with the family, or was it an enemy and a sort of a punishment for it? These are the sort of fascinating but unfortunately unknowing questions that often pop up in archaeology. We had the only real piece of gold that we found on the scheme, considering the scale of it, is quite remarkable. With this is a late Iron Age gold coin from a pit actually on a Roman site near Bar Hill towards Cambridge. This was minted in Gaul or in France around 50 BC and ended up here in Cambridgeshire through some system of trade and exchange. But I'm surprised there wasn't more bits of gold found. I mean, it's not common, but considering the scale of the excavations, there wasn't much of it found apart from this wonderful little coin here. So now we move into the Roman period. We found a great deal of evidence for Roman period activity on the scheme. Much of this comprises Roman settlements, again, mostly small farmsteads, but also some more substantial sites, which may be distribution or trading centres. We've also uncovered evidence about what the people in the Roman period were doing. Lots of pottery kilns, which I'll come back to in a bit, and agricultural trenches. These were mainly farming people, and the imprint on the agricultural imprint on the landscape is one thing that we see quite a lot of. And I'm just going to talk about a few of the sort of the highlights from this Roman massive Roman evidence that we've got. So the most common type of Roman site we're finding are Roman farmsteads, as I said, where sort of everyday people like you and I may have sort of lived and worked and eventually died on their settlements. Here's a few examples. The one on the left, close to Alconbury, is what we call sort of a Roman ladder settlement. You can see the big ditches on the outside here with these rungs of these enclosures going up there to the main part of the settlement to the north. And then the one on the right is close to Offord Cluny. It shows it does eventually show a Roman aisle building. It's probably easier to see from a reconstruction of what this would have looked like. This actually contained in situ surviving elm posts. This is really unusual. This is the first time we've found elm as a construction material from Roman Britain, certainly from a rural context. So it is pretty rare. It makes it up to be quite an unusual site. And this actually corresponds to what the site developed into in the later Roman period, the 3rd or 4th century AD, where it developed into quite a sort of a posh Roman villa residence with lots of imported foods and fine pottery and a great deal of nice finds. Unfortunately, we didn't get to excavate the actual main central villa building. That was one part of which is outside of the excavated area. So we've got all of the areas around it, which proves that it was a very high status and well-to-do site. Another really interesting and unusual site from the Roman period was this one, close to Fenstanton. It's very regular and very planned Roman settlement, and we've uncovered finds to suggest that it had a military association, got military finds and military buckles. It's also connected by these trackways to a number of other Roman farmsteads in the area. So we think it may have been a distribution centre a distribution site in this area. Some of the finds found from here, we found this rather lovely 2nd century chicken brooch there. Again, we do occasionally find these in Roman sites. They're also one of my favourite types of brooches. We find a slightly earlier 1st century AD Hod Hill brooch there, which is very much associated with the Roman military. And we also found this 2nd, 3rd century Roman military fitting there with this sort of inscription that says Bona on it as well. So again, it's very much associated with the military at that time. And another remarkable thing that we found dating to the Roman period from this area is the Roman pottery kilns. In total, we uncovered over 40 Roman pottery kilns from the scheme. Essentially, this is an entirely new industry for the area. Some of these were found by themselves, literally individual kilns adjacent to Roman farmsteads where potters would have made pots necessary for them and their family as and when they needed it. Others were found that looked to be more organised in small groups between 5 and 10 kilns, mostly over in the west in the sort of River Great Ouse area. There's just there's a reconstruction of what one of these sort of kilns would have looked like, with the pots sitting on top of this area here, and there would be a fired clay dome over the top of them. We've also found some indication on one site of a small potter's workshop. There was a cobbled surface, possibly where the potters were preparing their clay, surrounded by numerous large pits, either water holes or clay extraction pits. All of this next to the pottery kiln. So we've got quite a neat and well-preserved potter's workshop there. I realise this is a rapid tour, but I'm now moving on from the Roman period, and we're going into the Saxon period. Now, one of the most, I would say, impressive and definitely unexpected things about this project is the amount of evidence that we've had for Saxon activity. This is sort of the 5th to 11th century. We often found, typically for Saxon period, for early Saxon period in particular, you'll find at the most you'll find burial evidence, but far more difficult to find evidence for settlement activity. The Saxon period is often called the Dark Ages because we rarely find a great deal of information about them. So we've been incredibly lucky here. But we have found quite a lot. Certainly at the western end of the scheme, around this area here, we found lots of early, mid and late Saxon settlement, essentially the antecedents of Brampton, you can see up there. And in the other part of the scheme, we've got a site at Conington, which is also known as Kingstown, where we found a Middle Saxon settlement. And I'll talk a little bit more about both of these now. So at Brampton, the western end of the scheme, we found 30 of these so-called sunken featured buildings, or SFBs. Also, you might see them termed as Grubenhausen from the German term. They're essentially a structure with a sunken floor, partially dug into the ground. You can see there with the people in there. They date to the 5th to 8th century, and they're often thought to have been used for craft working, although they probably had numerous functions. And the ones that we found here include this one, which we're interpreting as one of the world's largest sunken featured buildings, SFBs. It's 8.5 by 7 meters. It's absolutely huge. And just to give you an idea of what these sort of buildings would have looked like, from archaeological reconstruction and looking at the excavated evidence, they seem to be this sort of triangular shape with a sort of a wooden floor over the covered area. The sunken area in the middle of it. So that's just an example of what these things are likely to have looked like. Now, these are the sunken areas of these sunken featured buildings are traps for usually a wonderful array of different materials, whether it's animal bone, pottery, sometimes curated Roman objects that have been found in there. But this is one of the objects that was found in here that was extremely rare. It's a bone reed pipe, not a flute as first thought. It's very rare. It's probably 8th century. It was voiced by means of an inserted vibrating reed of either natural cane, reed, or bone. And it would have been paired with another. You can see the flat edge there. It would have been paired with another pipe and joined together. And apparently it would create, say, sort of deep skirling sound, a bit like a sort of modern clarinet. But very, very few of these have been found. And this is one of the objects that were found within one of these sunken featured buildings. So we also found evidence for sort of slightly later, sort of middle to late Saxon settlement, particularly at Brampton. Now, this site here, because it's very, very complex, it's really of national significance. Sometimes we might get a few buildings or posts observable in the archaeological record, but most of them are middle to late Saxon settlements are actually underneath modern villages, so we only get a small glimpse of them. Here we have a whole excavated settlement with complete buildings. You've got alleyways, wells, rubbish pits and the like. you can really see how the sort of the morphology developed. We've got a row of 3 buildings. Was this Cambridgeshire's earliest street, or earliest excavated street at least? It's the real birth of the English village that we're seeing here, and we're really lucky to have such a large area of it exposed during the excavations. Meanwhile, I mentioned there was another major Saxon settlement. This one's mainly just mid-Saxon settlement at the eastern end of the scheme at Conington, which means King's Enclosure. There we've got early Saxon SFBs and post-built buildings as part of this major Middle Saxon enclosed settlement. But more interesting here is this Middle Saxon settlement. It includes a defined gateway. This is part of a gateway. Over this gateway was a single female burial buried face down. Now, again, what this was is uncertain. I mean, was she a sacrificial burial? Was she regarded as a witch? Again, this adds a sort of an enigmatic mystery to our investigations, which always fascinates us as archaeologists, and I hope it fascinates everyone else too. And so finally, for today's talk, during the medieval period, much of the area that we've been investigating became agricultural land, which means that a lot of the evidence that we're getting is in terms of field ditches and what's called ridge and furrow excavations from ploughing evidence. However, we did come across one very interesting medieval site at the western end of the scheme at Houghton. This is a deserted medieval village of Houghton over in this area here. So this is a plan of this medieval village. You can see it mainly comprises this long snaking like trackway going through the site, and either side of it there were plot boundaries and individual buildings that are to either side of it. And we also found a great deal of evidence for metalworking, particularly ironworking, in some of these areas around the site. Now, the settlement is likely to have been an outlier to the main settlement, medieval settlement at Brampton. It had no associated church or manor house that we've seen. Instead, it appears to have been more of a sort of an industrial zone associated with the nearby village, perhaps utilising the nearby woodland that we know existed there. Pottery from these excavations, from these features, seems to be between the 12th and the 15th centuries. It was probably the successor to the Middle and Late Saxon settlements that we've just seen earlier to the southeast. And here's just one of the structures that we found here. This has been interpreted as a blacksmith's workshop. The main building and the post holes you can see behind here. And this is a big big pit, or a number of intercutting pits just in front of the building that were actually stuffed full of metalworking evidence and the debris that would have built up over time from a blacksmith's workshop. So it's a very quick sort of run through of what is an absolutely massive excavation period of excavations. Just a little bit about what we're doing now. We finished the main part of the excavations in 2018, and since then we've been going through various different stages of what we call post-excavation work. So we started with what we call a post-excavation assessment, which was finished about 1.5 years ago. That's essentially where we look at what we got, or all the different, we got like 5 tons of pottery, 3 tons of animal bone. There were massive amounts of material that we got there, which we had to try and sort of ascertain what it was that was there. And then we produced what's called an updated project design, which really says, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to tackle this absolute massive data to get the most of it? Now, this is the stage we're on at the moment. This is the analysis stage, where we've decided what we're going to do with it. And now we are in the midst of analysing all of this interesting data. We haven't got the final picture yet, but we're working towards it. And then the final outputs working towards will come in the next 2 to 3 years. So some of these outputs here, there'll be big monographs and books. There'll be for academic audiences and archaeologists. There will be more popular books for the general public, so we can really try and highlight the importance of what we've been doing. There have been specialist journal articles for different aspects of the project. There'll be a fully online archaeological database. We've actually sponsored master's students as well at University of Reading to do various different aspects of extra work on this, and they've been really successful. producing interactive maps, and there are other things as well that we're doing as well. There are many different outputs for the project, which reflects the real scale of the work that we've been doing. And then if you wanted to find out more, there is the MOLA-Headland blog page, which we update every 2 months about interesting finds, interesting things that we've been doing. So we don't leave it all to the very end. We've just had, so you can look back through all of the past things there, lots of really nice pictures of some of the finds that we found there. And yeah, I will leave it there. I think that's pretty much bang on 30 minutes. So there you go. I thought I was going to go on for a lot longer than that. So there you go. Wow.
Thank you. Let me take you off.
Stop sharing my screen now.
Yeah, please.
There we go.
Fantastic. Gallery, excellent. Well, who would have known there was so much history locally? I'm astonished.
Cambridgeshire is probably one of the most intensely excavated areas of the whole of the country. It is, and that wasn't the case until about 20 years ago. Previously, prior to this job, I worked on something called the Roman Rural Settlement Project, which was a research project based at the University of Reading. And we did a sort of analysis of where all the main excavations had been. And up until about 1995, that thing, large areas of Cambridgeshire were just unknown. We just had no idea what was there. Since then, because of the amount of development that's going on, I'm sure there's controversies about that. But from an archaeological point of view, it means we have discovered so much. It's one of the best, I would say, archaeological landscapes in the whole of Europe, in terms of what we're finding there and the degree of archaeology that we're uncovering. So, pretty incredible place.
Why do you think there is such a concentration of activity at the western end?
I think that's to do with those river gravel terraces of the River Great Ouse.
Right.
Absolutely prime, well-drained settlement territory. I mean, there is some flooding there, of course, but higher terraces are generally sort of immune from a lot of that. And the landscape's easier to work, it's better drained than some of the sort of more clay-lined areas that's further inland, further away from the river. I mean, those clayland areas were really colonized properly only really from the Middle Iron Age onwards, when they got these deep plows that could go through some of the heavy soil. So then they can be obviously very agriculturally productive, but you need the equipment to be able to do that. So.
How did you find working with so much clay in the area?
Oh, horrible. I mean, I should say that I manage the post excavation thing, so I'm a real wimp. I go out on site and see all the main fieldwork archaeologists working away, talking with them, working with them. But yeah, I mean, I went once to visit in February, I think it was. It was a really wet February, and it was a really heavy clay site. And we had Bowser's pumping out as much water as possible. It was almost infilling at the same speed as we were pumping it out. So you have to dig big drainage channels. You have to put a lot of health and safety. You have to a lot of plastic matting down to make sure people don't sink up to their waists in mud. It's not always a glamorous profession.
There's a couple of questions been asked. One, was there any evidence of Saxon woodwork and tools?
Oh God. Not to my knowledge. We've got a beautiful Saxon decorated bone comb. I know, but as far as I'm aware, I don't. To be honest, I don't know. I have to be honest. I have to go and check. There are thousands and thousands of artifacts, and we haven't got the final reports through yet. I don't recall anything specific from the initial assessment, but that doesn't mean they're not there, because we won't get the reports back for that until January. So.
Penny asked the question, where can we see some of the archaeological remains? I imagine that's more like when can we see them?
Well, yeah, there is going to be a visitor centre in Northstowe. It's a small thing which we just had a meeting about a couple of weeks ago, which they're going to set up where they're going to have some of the objects both from the A14 excavations and from the big North Stowe excavations themselves, which Cambridge Archaeological Unit did. Yeah. So we're working on that together, and it's been sort of sponsored by part of the Homes England and Highways England as well. So, and that is due for opening next June. So we'll be in North Stowe. Other aspects of the museum, sort of the objects, will be at various local museums. You can see a couple of, I think there are some objects in the St Neots Museum. The Huntingdon Museum has just taken on, we had a big millstone that was decorated with you may have seen it in the news, a large phallic symbol, which made a lot of news, basically. And the museum are very keen for us to them to get hold of the millstone and display it to the public. So it's already on display in Huntingdon Museum. So you can go and see that there.
That's brilliant. Any other questions from anybody? Mark.
Thanks very much, Alex. That really was fascinating. Are there any, has everything been covered up? And is there any future possibility, opportunity of further excavation, or has tarmac and concrete sort of put it to bed for the foreseeable future?
All the areas that we excavated are all basically, we only excavate areas when they're going to be destroyed effectively. There are some areas that we decided not to excavate because the plans changed halfway through. So we may have stripped the topsoil, then there was a change. They weren't going to put this borrow pit in a certain place. So we recovered it over again. So we didn't actually excavate it in the end. We just we planned the top layer and that was it. So yes, there will almost certainly be further bits of excavation going on. We've been doing work at Huntingdon Station Road car park. That's almost finished now. And every time we're assured we've done the last bit of work, then they keep coming, oh, we've got an extra little bit, we've got an access road that's coming in here, another little bit there. So I've been saying for the last year and a half that we're almost there on the final bits of the excavations, and then a tiny bit more comes up. So I think we are almost there now.
Caroline, I see your hand up.
Well, I was asking what proportion of the sites have been preserved and how many were lost to the highways, but it sounds as if they were all lost to the highways.
Well, that's the reason we do this work, or the really detailed explanation, because this other I mean, you could put a line through any part of Cambridgeshire or a housing area through any part of Cambridgeshire and you will almost certainly hit archaeology. So we have to go in there and record it as thoroughly as we possibly can. I mean, some areas, for example, I said the Roman villa that we didn't excavate, they mitigated that to go around it. So the area that they were doing, so they didn't excavate the Roman villa. That is still there. We've got the outer boundary of it. We've got the big aisle building and the outskirts of the villa complex, and where all the sort of maybe some of the lower status people were living. But the higher status villa, which we know, well, we're about 90% sure is there. We didn't actually excavate. So there are some things which whenever it's possible, the idea is not to excavate, but it's only when it's not possible then we do. And in a scheme like this, it just covers such a huge area that we've had to excavate a lot.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Otherwise, we can let Alex get back to his proper job.
Oh yeah, I've got interviews in 7 minutes.
Right.
We should let you go. Thanks
well,
so much.
Mark is our chairman of the group. Mark, did you want to just say thank you to?
Yeah, well, what can I say in a few seconds? But fascinating. I mean, there's a huge number of sort of questions and things. It'd be lovely to discuss more with you. But it's we very much appreciate you giving up your time, and
No
it's good to know that we're all part of a continuous settlement for a very long period of time. So it roots us, even though it's now in concrete. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And great presentation and really well put over. So thanks ever so much on behalf of us all.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very
I
much.
just ask you to put your hands together, people. Thank you. Alex, a joy. And thank
Brilliant.
you so much. I'm pleased we got it together. I hope
Yes, I'm pleased as well. That was great. That's brilliant. Okay, thank you
You're
very much.
welcome.
Bye.
Cheers, Alex.
Good day.
Bye.
Bye.